Welcome everyone, Michael here with Offshore Citizen. About a year and a half ago or so, I made a video where I was talking about sort of my view on the real estate situation in UAE, prices wise, and what I thought in terms of whether it was a good idea to buy at that point in time. There was kind of like a bunch of people out there sort of pumping UAE real estate. And so I said, all right, like I don't really like that. I like to try and buy when things are a good deal and when they're going to do well. And I think there's a lot of sort of back-looking bias where people say, oh, prices have just gone up, so it's a great place to invest. And it's like, no, the opposite is true. You know, when prices have gone down, it's a good place to invest often, at least once you're going to turn around. And so I wanted to kind of explore that previously. And since then, I've seen somebody fairly recently made a video where they referenced my video. And so I figured they kind of like made a bunch of comments that I thought were sort of inaccurate about the situation, about how you assess, like, are you in a bubble? What does it mean that you're in a bubble? What are prices going to do? How do you evaluate that? And I think when you have the wrong mental model for something, you tend to reach the wrong conclusions. And so as a result, I wanted to go through, kind of reiterate kind of my position on it, explain a little bit about the reasoning of what you should be thinking about the UAE real estate market, and talk a little bit about, you know, does what I was thinking at the time still hold? So let's dive in and look at that. Before we do, if you haven't already, please hit the subscribe button, hit the all notification bell. Welcome, I am Michael. Thank you for being here. I really appreciate your support. If you are interested in the things that we help here, which are helping people to move to other countries, getting residency permits, setting up bank accounts, all that sort of thing, as well as international tax planning, we're some of the foremost internationals in the world. So helping you, whether you're staying in your home country and trying to optimize your global tax through some sort of an international structure, or you're relocating to another country and doing tax planning around that, this is kind of our area of expertise where we really stand out. So either of those things is helpful to you, including places, things like moving to UAE, please reach out to us. You can book a call with me, calendar.com/Michael-Rosmer, link in the description below, or you can send a message through offshorecitizen.net. Okay, so just quickly, at the time, what did I say? I said, hey, listen, that particular quarter, 84 new projects had been launched in UAE, okay? So you can kind of do some rough math about what that means in terms of number of units that are over time going to come to the market. The market had just gone up like crazy. So essentially from, you know, COVID, sort of like mid-COVID period, sometime in 2020, certainly through 2021, like 2021, great year, 2022, great year, 2023 even has been like high volumes, etc. There's, I think, a little bit of fudging in terms of understanding the prices. And so we'll talk about that in just a second. But this being said, the Dubai real estate market has been one of the best performing markets over the last few years, for sure. And at the time I said, hey, listen, I don't think that, hey, the bubble is going to burst and this is all going to collapse and, you know, next year you're going to have some big downturn. What I said is more like 2027, 2028, you will probably have, I think the term that I used was a negative inflation adjusted return, something like that. And so basically the idea was, look, I'm not saying that the market is going to go down to the point where, you know, you're buying things at 50% off and everybody's going to lose all their money and all that sort of thing. That's not the statement at all. The statement is, if you buy today, then you are probably not going to make money on that property in terms of like appreciation if you look at it, say, 5 years out. If you take, you know, let's call it last year, so between 2024 and 2029 on an inflation adjusted basis, you will probably not get any appreciation. You'll probably have negative appreciation, actually. That's kind of like the loose idea that kind of I've espoused, and I more or less continue to hold. So certainly you can have really big unexpected events. For example, when there was the war starting with Ukraine, you obviously had a flood of Russians and Ukrainians coming into UAE that drove the prices up quite a bit more than would have been expected based on the trend, okay? Now, my thesis is essentially that you're sort of having a reverse of that will kind of gradually happen. So I think it's pretty likely, not certain, but pretty likely that in 2025, the war with Ukraine will end. I certainly hope that it does. And when that happens, I can tell you I've talked to quite a number of Russians who own property, who own a bunch of things, who say they're going back to Russia, okay? There's going to be some Ukrainians who are going to feel the same. Obviously, some people are still going to stay. Doesn't matter. What you're just looking at is you're just looking at the inflows and outflows of people, okay? That's sort of like one of the first things, because that's what we need to figure out, supply and demand, right? The second thing that I was stating was I said, listen, the number of units that they're putting onto the market, when those units start to hit the market with volume, is going to exceed the demand. And so in this particular video, and by the way, I've seen a variety of different pieces that various different people have sent me and I've discussed, and I have friends who are realtors and all this. If somebody is selling property, do not trust their forecast about whether you're in a bubble, because their incentive is not to tell you, oh yeah, prices are probably going to go down, right? And by the way, it might still be okay to buy, even if you think prices are going to go down, because there are other reasons to buy aside from just, owning a property as an investment. However, if you're looking for a good investment on a risk-weighted basis, I don't think it's a great place to go. And I kind of explained this to a friend recently. He was saying, hey, like maybe the prices go down 20%, so what, And I'm like, well, it's not the 20% just that you have to consider, it's the opportunity cost over that period of time. So if I can deploy my money and I can make 20% a year for, call it 3-4 years, then my delta isn't between 100 and 80, it's between 80 and 200, right? So that's kind of the significant thing that from an investment standpoint, I'm thinking of. Again, aside from investments, totally different conversation, right? You might say, hey, listen, I love this place. I want to be in this place long term. Perfect. Awesome. Buy. Wonderful. But just if you're thinking about trying to make an investment return and asking, is this a good market to invest in? Timing always matters when it comes to investment, right? And I would say it hasn't been a good time since 2022, basically. So 2023, 2024, I would say, Typically not. Basically, by the middle of 2023, you were kind of like, okay, this market is hot, risk to reward doesn't seem too exciting. You can obviously find specific investments. Real estate is a very asset-specific investment, meaning that you can find one unit in a building that is a great deal when all the rest of the building is not a great deal. You can find, like that is just the nature of it. Same thing with deals. You can have deal terms that are really attractive. That's one of the nice things about real estate as an asset class. But just broadly speaking, is this like where I go looking for the opportunity? No, it's not. So now let's talk a little bit about this whole kind of mindset, because in this video, the person was saying, hey, well, the rental prices support the current sales prices. You're like, yeah, okay, that doesn't mean anything. Because the question isn't whether they're at this point, the question is, will they sustain? Not whether it makes sense right now. And I saw this, by the way, I didn't know really anything about real estate investing at all until it was 2007. I went and I took a personal development course. It was super useful for me, actually really, really wonderful personal development. And at the end of that course, one of the people who was in the class said, hey, listen, I'm a real estate investor and I'd like to put on a thing for you guys to like show you how I've built wealth. And so she and her partners had acquired, I think it was 70 properties over the course of that period of time in that area, something like that. It might have been fewer, but whatever, something in that range. And it was the first time that I got to understand how leverage worked in real estate. It was a great presentation. But I remember people asking her, saying, hey, are we in a bubble? And she could tell all the stories of why we weren't in the bubble. And turned out she was wrong, right? So I kind of have to say, okay, well, like, it's not about does it make sense today? So for example, you will have very high sales volumes at a time when the market is super hot and it is going to go down. Like, the fact that you have sales volumes is not proof that the market is going to be great in 3 years or 5 years or something like that when those projects complete. And this is like the really, really important thing. I saw on Instagram, I don't know, a day or two ago, there was an ad for the Six Senses residence in UAE. And, okay, it's going to be one of the tallest buildings in the world, residential towers, high-end luxury building. What was the advertisement? It was, hey, one of the best properties to flip. I'm like, that's not good. That's not good at all. When I see realtors running around saying, hey, listen, you should buy this place. You'll only have to put down 10 or 20 or 50% because you're not even going to have to pay the rest, because on the backside of it, you're just going to flip it for, a few $100,000 profit. That's a bad sign. You don't want a market which is driven by a lot of that. Now, to be fair, are there legitimate buyers coming in who are actually moving to UAE? Yes, the UAE population grows every year. There's a kind of steady influx of people. The question is not that. The question is, I'm certainly not betting that won't continue to be the case. I think in general, bullish on UAE, bullish actually broadly on various parts of the Middle East. But the question is, what is the rate of new units coming to the market relative to the number of people coming to the market? And so, you have to kind of break and slice this down sector by sector. But I'm going to focus specifically on the luxury sector because it's the sector kind of I know best. Luxury, ultra luxury are the two kind of areas that I mainly pay attention to. And if you just look, you can say, all right, well, the prices are already at a certain price, okay? And that is a market equilibrium. So the prices are not going up meaningfully based on that equilibrium changing. In other words, if you just kept everything the same and you added supply, prices should go down. That's basically the way that it should be. Obviously, okay, maybe you can kind of play it a little bit so, it doesn't immediately go down. It doesn't go down that much. It has to get a sufficient amount of inventory added up, blah, 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 blah. But that basic concept is true. Similarly, if the prices are going to stay static, then you need the number of people coming in to match the number of units that are coming available on the market. Now, I will give some qualifications here. There are certainly quite a few units in UAE that get purchased not for habitation. And in some cases, people are not even worried about renting them. Okay, so like it is a weird market in this regard. You've had historically a lot of people from different countries where their money is not safe in their country. They want to go and put it someplace safe, so they buy real estate in UAE. There's like a whole bunch of different factors at play here. So we're kind of trying to like crystallize and simplify all that stuff down. However, if you're looking for luxury hotel residences, for example, there's just not that many buildings in UAE. Okay, there's just not. And so call it, I mean, it depends on how you categorize them, but call it like 10. Okay, 10 like worthwhile properties. You've got some address properties, you've got a few others. There's not that many. How many are being built right now? So announced, in sales, being built, put onto the market. How many is that? More than 30. More than 30. Okay, so you're talking about like growing the supply of that sector of property by a factor of 4. And so you can just ask yourself, those properties are, I mean, it depends on whether you're talking about 1 bedroom, 2 bedrooms, 3 bedroom, you know, whatever. But like typically $5,000 to $10,000 a month to rent, like in that range. Sometimes a little bit higher. Again, but sometimes on different spectrums depending on what you're renting. But let's just say in that range. So that's the market equilibrium for those types of units. The question is, if you quadruple or triple the amount of supply, are you going to have quadruple or triple the number of people who are coming in fit the target market for that? And I think the answer is clearly, absolutely, unequivocally not, unless there's something crazy that happens. So that's a problem. Look on the ultra luxury category. I'm talking about units that are 15 million to, I mean, the Bugatti Tower is listed for 750 million dirhams for the Sky Mansion, okay? If you go down and you look, there's a new Ritz-Carlton being built. There are 13 of these mansions in very nice places, but like we're talking about places that are selling, I don't remember what it is, 250, 300 million dirhams, something like that. There's a lot of properties coming up in that price bracket. Here's the problem. And like, so Omniat has like, man, let's see here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, at least 6 that I can think of immediately, properties, all which are in kind of this $10+ million category for unit. There's the Peninsula. There is, like I said, the Bugatti Tower. There's Baccarat. There's the new Volante Tower. There's like, we can just kind of run down and down and down the list. Like a ton of these places. Problem is, if you're talking about a category where you're spending, you know, let's call it 100 million dirhams plus, you basically have to be a billionaire to afford those places. Like there's just not that many people who can afford. Are there billionaires in the UAE? Yes. Are there centimillionaires? Yes. Will there continue to be? Yes. But the problem is those people can choose any property they want. I went and visited a good friend and client a little while ago. It was a very nice property. He was telling me kind of just down the street. They had renovated one of the other ones. They sold it for 280 million dirhams. And so he said, now all the neighbors are like, hey, listen, let's knock our places down and renovate them and make them into these modern things so we can get these huge sale prices. Well, the problem is there's only so many buyers in that category. It's not a lot of buyers in that category. I went and toured one of the top properties and went there, like this triplex penthouse. It was bought by one of the wealthiest families in Europe, who the family is thinking about selling it now and buying another one in somewhere else in the city. Like you sort of look at this and you're like, well, how many billionaires are going to move here? You think that it's going to be like there's a few thousand billionaires in the world. Okay, centimillionaires, you can multiply it out, etc. Like there's just not that many people who are going to move in. Over time, will they gradually fill out? Probably, but will they fill out? Like most of these properties are scheduled to be completed by 2027 to 2029. Typically they're late, so extend that by a year, you're talking about 2028 to 2030, right? 2028 to 2030, you're going to have this enormous amount of high-end inventory coming onto the market. And barring something crazy that would drive a tremendously large number of people who can afford properties of that caliber to the market, I think that's very bearish for the price of those properties. Very bearish. In spite of being good buildings, in spite of being good builders, in spite of whatever, these things are irrelevant. It's just like you can choose. In the luxury segment, same thing, right? When you just go and you take a look, like I said, you have 10 buildings, which are, loosely kind of in that equivalent category that is going to expand to about 40. Where are all those people coming from? We're talking about like big buildings, by the way. We're talking about, in many cases, hundreds of units in these particular types of units. Like, for example, more address properties, right? There's more address properties on the way. This is just like, at the end of the day, much more supply than I see coming on. And people are looking very much, they're like, oh, hey, well, the number of units that are being released in 2025 is this much, which matches approximately the number of people who are coming in. It's like, yeah, we're not worried about 2025. We're not worried about that at all. We're not thinking about that. We're thinking about how many project and units under development and what does the kind of delivery schedule for those look like based on their projections and pre-sale. And the answer is there is quite a few more, at least in quite a number of the categories, than what it is that you would expect. And so to me, this is just very obviously very speculative market to be coming into. And so If you want to buy it for lifestyle, amazing, great. If you want to buy it as an investment, I would say hold off. Like go and look somewhere else, do something, there's lots of other things to put your money into. You don't need to go in that regard. So anyway, quick thing, because I had mentioned before about the prices being a little bit deceptive. Okay, so when they look, they'll say like, oh, hey, prices are up 23% year over year. What they're not telling you is that's not 23% year over year for the same unit. Okay, so this is a little bit deceptive. What they're doing is they're measuring the average across the units. And so what will sometimes happen is you say, oh, well, this new ultra luxury project just got launched. And so those things are selling for $20 million a unit, whatever the number happens to be, right? That's going to lift the average of all these others. So the real way to go and take a look at it is to pay attention to units in the same building over time and what those are selling for. And a lot of those have been stalled out more or less since around the time when I made that video. They have just really not gone up meaningfully. And I can kind of mention a variety of different buildings. Now, it's not totally true for all of them. Some of them are up a bit. Some, there's an assortment within the space. But broadly speaking, when you see these like, hey, prices are up by X, you have to kind of like become more granular and think about like, well, how is that number calculated? And in some cases, it might be perfectly legitimate, right? It might be like, oh yeah, this is pretty accurately the case. In other cases, it's reflective of the hype cycle and what's going on with pre-sales and what those pre-sales are doing to drive this, or it's not equivalent units, right? So the real measure is equivalent units. So anyway, I hope that helps. I hope it gives like a little bit of context. If you have interest in coming to UAE, I'm happy to help you connect you with realtors who we deal with. If you want to get residency, happy to help you with that. And if you're interested in real estate somewhere else, tell me like where you think are good places to invest. It's something that I did some recent investments in North America, and certainly we look for opportunities all over the place. So would love to hear what it is that you've got that you think is high quality, because always looking for quality deal flow. So hope that helps. Put the comments below. Reach out to us if you need. I will see you on the next video.